Morning all. All right, I'm starting with something different today. Because I have to. Before I get to the preview, I have to discuss this because certainly there is something there to be discussed. So the Toronto Maple Leafs are currently number 6 on the power rankings. Right now, today, absolutely, they're right there. And there's a lot of comments getting made. Now, on the power rankings this season, the Leafs have been number 1 once, or twice, I should say. So for 2 weeks, they were number 1. They were number 2 once. They've been number 3 4 times. That's 7 times they've been top 3 out of 24 power rankings, which seems high considering apparently I hate them and I have disgust for them and disdain for them. The disdain is news to me, and here's why. So when I'm looking at my all-time best performing videos, very often they're Toronto videos. There's a reason why Toronto videos do well. Toronto Maple Leafs have the largest fan base. And so they also have a passionate one. They also have a loud one. When I was on the Steve Dangle show there not that long back, and I was asked about Leafs fans, and I basically said, I don't have an issue with Leaf fans. I know there's people that do, but I understand that, like, when you have more fans, you're going to have also more of an obnoxious part of a fan base. And I say that as a Canuck fan because there are certainly a lot of obnoxious Canuck fans. I remember the 2011 run just because you would think from talking to some Canuck fans, not all, that they had already won 4 or 5 Stanley Cups and it was a fait accompli, they were going to do it again. And so when I would question it, I would get, they're going to win, obviously. It's not obvious to me. I don't think you've been a fan as long as I have. But when I look at my all-time best performing videos, all I have to do is look back to last year. 101,077 views currently on a video I did the day before Game 7 between Toronto and Montreal, where I said, this is a big moment for Toronto. How are they going to respond? How are they going to deal with it? And I've seen the series, the mini-series on Amazon Prime on the Toronto Maple Leafs and on how that all went down. And I agree with Paul McLean that a lot of it is their personal demons and their struggles come from, in large part, I think there's psychological issues. So that video earned more than $500 US, which in Canadian money is approximately $5 million. Anyways, the exchange rate's not that high, but you guys understand that, like, the US dollar is worth more than Canadian. So since that's how the pay works, yeah. And then when I reviewed Game 7 a day later between Toronto and Montreal, that video currently has 162,997 views and generated more than $1,000 US. So 2 videos that were posted within about a day of each other generated more than $1,500 US. And then it was gone. So when Toronto's out of the playoffs, the channel makes significantly less money. There's significantly less views. And that's how it goes. So when I see people saying, oh, he really hates when Toronto does well, I don't know that I do. Before this channel started up back in 2016, when it wasn't my job and it was, I was just a regular hockey fan like everybody else, I wouldn't have cared as much. But yeah, I feel sad when I see Toronto blowing it. And if you've seen that Game 7 review, I was quite angry at what I was seeing, that there's a lot of Toronto Maple Leaf players that make a lot of money, that in this really big game, it just wasn't there. And then the blame gets put on Freddie Anderson, and I get it, the blame's going to get put on the goaltender. And so I have some concerns that if something happens in the first round this year, the first finger pointing is going to be at Jack Campbell, and then there'll be a rotating out of the goaltender, and that may or may not be the problem. But I want to talk about the power rankings too, because I update them every day, and currently Toronto's number 6. They're only behind 5 other teams. And their upcoming schedule, tonight they're in Florida. So that's a huge one. That's a big one. Then they're in Dallas on Thursday. That's a big one too, because Dallas is playing for a playoff spot. Dallas is very good at home. And then they're at home against Montreal on Saturday, which is also a big game because the last time they played Montreal, they lost. And when I look at the power rankings over the last 5 weeks, they dropped from number 8 to number 11 on a week where they went 1-2. They lost to Buffalo and Vancouver. They dropped to number 12 the next week, even though they went 2-1. They did lose that game against Arizona. And then they moved up to 10. They went 10-2 that week. They lost against Buffalo and Nashville. Then 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, they moved up to 9. They only went 1-1 that week. and they lost the second game against Montreal, and yet they still moved up. Then they went 4-0 last week. They moved up to one spot. Teams in front of them weren't losing. And that's in general, that's kind of how that works when you get up to the top row. It should be more difficult to move up. And it's how it works. So currently, looking at the record over that period of time, they're 10-7. So before the 4 wins in a row, they were 6-7 over that period in time, and they went from 8th to 9th, even though they were 6-7, which again tells me that the way that I do my power rankings works. And I've stood behind them for years. There was a point 4 years ago where I actually didn't rank Toronto one week because there was so much complaining about where Toronto was. I just didn't rank them that week. I've at times thought about not ranking Boston either, because I know I've had weeks where Boston does well and I maybe don't move them up as much as I might another team, because I'm like, if I put them ahead of that team, I'm going to get accused of bias, so I can't do that. There was the 1 week recently where I had Vancouver at 11th, and there was some panic about that. Like, oh, why is Vancouver so high? Because they were playing really well. Now they're not, so they're 21st. So, again, I think it works. But the narrative that somehow this is just like some big on hate. The funny thing is, if I stuck them at number 1 on the power rankings, that's a popular video with most of the Leaf fans, right? And so that's the thing. And it would probably get more views and all this other fun stuff. But I have to stick to my system. And there is a system to this. You know, Boston, it was a long time before Boston moved up. They've won 9 of their last 11. I know they lost against Toronto. The funny thing is that the people point to certain things in losses for Toronto and say, well, that doesn't count because, and yet I could point to that Boston loss against Toronto and say, right, and the game against Toronto was not indicative of how Boston's playing in general. It's a one-off. So there's that trade-off as well. I mean, currently, Dallas has had 7 wins of their last 10, and they're still 17th on the board. They're not in the top half. I've been impressed with the fact they're winning. I haven't necessarily been that impressed with the wins, and so that's something that I have to consider with that too. But it is one of those things where I understand that it's not the majority. I get that, but it is a very vocal group, and it has started to show up on all the videos. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna do a video about it. Post it for all the fine people on the internet, and then I'm going to move on. But it's weird because it's like, looking at these numbers, what would have happened if Toronto got to the second round? What if they got to the conference finals? I don't know. What if they won a Stanley Cup? I could go to Vegas for a week if they won a Stanley Cup. The first year that Vegas went to the Stanley Cup final, it was part of the reason why we ended up in Vegas. It's because Vegas fans, all the videos on Vegas generated a lot of revenue, a lot of views, and so we were able to go to Vegas that first year. And so it is bizarre, the idea that I get so mad watching games. I don't. I cheered when Matthews got that 54th goal last night. I like the idea of him breaking Vive's record. When Matthews got off to a slow start, I still said I think he's going to win the Rocket Richard Trophy, because I know how red hot he can get. I've seen it for years. I've said that I think he's the best goal scorer in the game right now. I said that last year. So I find that whole thing odd. And again, why would I watch the Leafs miniseries if I really hated them? I think that with Toronto, Kyle Dubas does the best he can. I think he's still learning on the job. And there have been good things he's done. There have been iffy things he's done along the way. And there's been really good contracts. There's been iffy contracts as well. But honestly, I'm a huge Marner fan. People know that. I have a Marner jersey. I have 2 Tavares jerseys. And so it's odd to me. And the only reason I don't have Matthews, everybody else has Matthews. So, it's fine. Everybody else has an Austin Matthews. I'm good. I'll stick with the Marner jersey, because I've said I think that when Marner's at his best, I think he's their most valuable player. I think the goal scorer is going to always be the one that gets a lot of attention, but I think Marner really is the engine that drives that offense when they're going. And I think Marner's playing fantastic. He's got, what, 20, 21 points in the last 10 games or something ridiculous. So, I think that shows that he's not underrated, but I think he's over criticized. There's a way to put it. I think Marner gets over criticized when things aren't necessarily going well in Toronto. But it is odd to me, the idea that I'm seething. I have contempt for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right, because when they win a game, those reviews do better. When when they're doing well, the traffic on the channel generally is pretty good. I I can't, like, sure, there's a hockey fan for me that definitely has a team to cheer for in every game. People don't know who I'm cheering for in every game because I hide it really, really well. And I can tell when I'm reading a review and somebody will say, you can tell he's really mad about this game and that this team won. And I chuckle reading that comment going, actually, I was glad that team won. I was glad that team lost. I guess I hit it really well, because that was always my goal. But the interesting thing is that, if I do videos on the Toronto Maple Leafs, they will get the most views. I don't go out of my way to make extra Toronto Maple Leafs content. This is a rarity. Uh, because when this channel started out, one of the reasons I started it was because on the Canadian side of the border, it's all Toronto, it's Montreal, to some extent Vancouver. There's teams that don't get reported on as much, like Ottawa, like Winnipeg. And on the south side of the border, you've got wherever the superstars like Crosby, Kane, others like that are, you're going to get that media attention. Of course, your big markets. But other markets didn't get any attention. So I declared from the beginning, I'm going to report on every single team in the league. And I do. And I try to keep it as even as possible. The only reason that there's more talk about Canucks here and there than others is because I'm in that market. So I see more of it. And of course, since TSN, Sportsnet are sources I use for news videos, they're going to report more on the Canadian teams than the American. I try to make sure I have American sources as well. I follow as many of the beat reporters as possible. I've had good interactions with most of them. And yeah, I try to try my best to make sure that if you cheer for Carolina, there'll be Carolina content. If you cheer for Nashville, there'll be Nashville content. And if you cheer for the Coyotes, there'll be Coyotes content, and it won't be about franchise stability, that kind of thing, right? And I'll talk about their future, and I'll talk about what I like that they've got going on. And I try my best to keep it as balanced as humanly possible. Which there are times that can be a little more difficult. If a team that I cheer for gets eliminated from the playoffs, I'm not exactly happy, but I'm watching, which is a difference from where it was before I had a channel. There used to be a time where the Canucks are in an elimination game and they're down after 2, and I'm like, that's enough. I'm good. And I change the channel to something else, and I don't watch the third. And then I look at the score and I'm like, yeah, no, they didn't come back. I didn't think they would, so I didn't come back either. And like, yeah, so that's the difference. And I there were times where Boston, yeah, just Boston and Vancouver, where I might be kind of angry after a loss. Not usually with Dallas. I kind of expect it with Dallas. I kind of expect that if it's a one win and you're in, that if it comes out at the end of the year, I'd put money on them not getting through it, because it's Dallas. It's how they work. But I love the teams, right? So that's just how that goes, and it doesn't mean I hate Toronto. Last time that there was a game 7 between Toronto and Boston, I wanted Toronto to win it. I felt Toronto deserved that series. Boston did not. When Boston came back and won that series, I didn't think. Well, when Boston won the series, when they won it in Game 7, I didn't think that was the right team moving on. Which is a whole other argument we can have at some other time, that sometimes the best team doesn't win. Sometimes the better team in the series comes up short, especially if it's a Game 7 situation. It is a coin flip. It is a roll of the dice. You can't... And it's not that there's undeserving teams moving on. I don't want to make it sound that way either. But yeah, there are times you will look at a series and go, this team played really, really well and didn't move on. This team might have got a little bit lucky and moved on, and then maybe that luck starts to really roll for them and they win a cup out of it. But yeah, so there you go. I just wanted to start the day with this, get it done, get it out of the way. Again, currently Toronto's number 6. If they lose against Florida, they don't move down because that's Florida. Florida's number 2. If they lose against Dallas after moving against Florida, it will depend on what teams behind them have done. And if they lose against Montreal at home on Saturday, that's the concerning thing. And this is why. This is the one concern I have with Toronto. Outside of, I still have some concerns with the consistency of the goaltending. If they're up against a team like, if it does end up being Tampa, it's Vasilevsky. Like, it's Vasi, and it's hard to beat him in the playoffs. If it's Boston, that might be a little bit easier because Swayman's unproven and Olmark's unproven in the playoffs as well. But my concern is you got Buffalo on the board twice as having beaten them. Vancouver beat them, Arizona beat them, Montreal beat them, Nashville beat them, and Nashville is on the verge of potentially missing the playoffs in the West. My concern is that when you have a team that plays down to their opponents, and Toronto fans have said this, they've said, oh, they're great against really good teams, they play down to their opponents. Where that comes through in the playoffs is they don't have to worry about playing Buffalo in the playoffs. But when they get ahead in a series, like last year against Montreal, they let up. They let up. Montreal gets back into the series in Game 5, they win Game 6, and then they win Game 7. And that, to me, spoke to Toronto maybe losing their focus, losing their self-confidence. And I think there's some of that with their game right now when you look at how they've played against teams that are below them in the playoffs and their lack of success against teams that are outside the playoffs, right? So that's my one concern. Very good week for them last week. They did move up. It's tough to move up into the top row. That's the way power rankings should be. They've moved up already this week based on the one result against Tampa. And if they beat Florida and Dallas, they will move up no matter what happens against Montreal. Unless one of the teams behind them on that board has an absolutely fantastic week. But the way that power rankings work, they shouldn't be, this team was 10th last week, they're 4th this week. Because then if they have a bad week, they could be back to 10th the following week. And that's where the power rankings used to go when I was reactive with them, where teams would fluctuate wildly, and it didn't matter. It got to the point where on Saturday I would look at the board and go, I don't know why these teams are there. Yeah, that team won 3 games this week, but they should they be that high? Because then you have to do it with everybody. So then the New York Islanders, who are 7-3 in their last 10, they would have to be in the top half of the board. They'd have to be probably top 10, right? Because they've won so many recently, they've looked really good recently, but they haven't moved up as much because I don't do the reactive board anymore. And it is, I know I will never make everybody happy. That's not my intention. My only point in this video really is the idea that somehow there's some kind of hate that comes through in how I figure out who moves where on that board. It doesn't make any sense. Because then I'd find an excuse to have Vancouver in the top half of the board. I'd find an excuse to have Dallas in the top 10 right now. Because they've played, okay. They've played well. They haven't played fantastic, but their record would be all that mattered in that case. So I could argue, you know what? They've won 7 out of 10. They belong in the top 10. These guys have won, 9 out of 10. They belong in the top 2. And then it just becomes chaos, right? So anyways, I just wanted to start the day with that. Get it out of the way. Get it done. Get it put aside. And now I can get into the preview. I can do a news video later on and all that. So there you go. And I have this. This is the most bizarre. It's the same color. The letters on this are the same color as the jersey itself. I don't understand. I don't. But anyways, there you go. I mean, I know why they did it. It just, I don't know how that makes people want to buy it. But anyways, people probably watching this and going, is this off? And I'm doing like old TV things that kids wouldn't know. It used to be a knob you'd have to turn because the contrast would be off. And remember when the tilt, okay, for old people, the tilt, yeah, you get it a little bit, and then you have the vertical hold. Anyways, but yeah, so there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, it's not meant to be taken that seriously. It's just for fun. And the fun's kind of been getting pulled out of it again for me lately. So I just wanted to make this video before doing the preview for today. Thank you guys so much for all your support though. It's amazing. And again, maybe I do hope the Leafs do well, right? Maybe it's better for me if the Leafs do well. And I mean, it would be, it would suck if Boston was out in the first round. Toronto takes them out, but then Toronto's in the second round, and I would probably be okay with that. But there you go. Thank you guys so much for all your support, and I mean that, and that includes Toronto fans too, because again, I know it's the minority. I know it's not the majority with these statements and all this. It's just getting kind of obnoxious is a word for it. It's just been getting like it's a lot where I'm kind of rolling my eyes a lot going through the comment section right now. And so, yeah, there you are. I will be glad to have the power rankings over 24 weeks of them already. And there's 3 more coming up with the pause having off the season early in 2020. And then last year, the season wasn't that long. It just feels like the power rankings are going on for a long time this year. And yeah, turns out they are. But yeah, I will talk to you guys again soon because I have to do the preview.